On Tuesday, Senate Republican leaders responded to the just-released CPI report, slamming record-high government spending for inflation and a sluggish economy. Led by Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, the GOP legislators took turns blaming President Biden and congressional Democrats for the troubling economic news. The sharp rise in the prices of staple goods has become a major focal point as the midterms near. Republicans have sought to tie inflation as a millstone around Democrats, but Democrats claim their legislation will ultimately help the economy and ease financial strains on working and middle-class voters.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I can't recall ever starting a stakeout with a quote from Larry Summers, Bill Clinton's Secretary of the Treasury, but he really summed it up. This is Larry Summers today. Excuse me. This is Larry Summers today. Today's CPI report confirms that the U.S. has a serious inflation problem, obviously. Core inflation is higher this month than for the quarter, higher this quarter than last quarter, higher this half of the year than the previous one, and higher last year than the previous one. That's Larry Summers today on the state of our economy. Everything is costing dramatically more. Everybody understands what the word inflation means, what you're paying at the pump, what you're paying for food. This is entirely the result, as Larry Summers predicted in March of 21, the result of dumping $2 trillion on the economy last year, which he predicted at the time and confirms again today, is the reason we're looking at 40-year high inflation. Every Democrat voted for it. Every Republican voted against it. The most prominent Democrat economist in the country predicted it at the time, confirmed it again today.
They are gathering at the White House later today to crow about 8.3% year-over-year increase in inflation, like that's some sort of victory. And I just would remind people that when President Biden took office in January of 2021, the inflation rate was 1.4%. So they may be taking a victory lap at the White House, but I can tell you one thing, the American people are not, because they are feeling the direct impact of this every single day. What this report also showed was that the price of food and groceries has gone up 13.5% year-over-year, the highest rate of increase since 1979, back when I was a senior in high school. And as Roy Blunt has pointed out, the real rate of inflation, if you go back to January of 2021 to roll forward to today, isn't 8.3%, it's 13.2%. These numbers are staggering. And the White House seems to be just in absolute denial of what impact this is having on the American people and their budgets. And I see it in agriculture. One of the reasons, obviously, that food is increased at the grocery store, too, is because inputs for American agriculture have increased dramatically. In fact, this year will be the record year in terms of gross farm receipts. In other words, top-line revenues in agriculture, highest ever. 14% increase over last year, and yet they're going to show an inflation-adjusted net farm income reduction of 1%. Highest cash receipts ever, historically, and yet a reduction in inflation-adjusted cash income. And that's why when you look at the cost of fertilizer since 2020, it's gone up 84%. Cost of fuel and oil has gone up 35%. since 2020. You look at these increases and what it costs to produce a crop this year, and you can see why all these, throughout the entire food chain, the impact inflation is having, ultimately felt by the American consumer and the American family who are paying for these much higher prices at the grocery store. This is an example, again, of just the complete split screen you see in this country between the White House, celebrating, taking the victory lap down there this afternoon, and the American people dealing with the reality left by the policies of this administration, who still don't get it. They continue to celebrate the tax increases, the amount of spending they're doing, and inflation continues to choke the American people.
Well, the inflation numbers came in today, and they came in hot. 13.2% increase in inflation from the time that Joe Biden came into the White House to where we are today. And the American public are feeling the heat, and they're falling behind. And so we have no more votes this afternoon because all of the Democrats have headed to the White House to celebrate this. They want to celebrate, have a party to celebrate a vote that passed along party line votes. What they're celebrating is raising taxes, hiring tens of thousands of new IRS agents, and attacking American energy. And I guarantee what we're going to see from this law is higher inflation. We see that today, higher debt, and higher energy costs. All of those things are going to be true. So it's no surprise that the American families feel that they've been forgotten, ignored, and betrayed by Joe Biden and all the Democrats. We've seen the prices go up for rent, housing, energy, food, groceries, all of those things. And as ranking member of the Energy Committee, let me talk just a little bit about energy. Because it's what keeps the lights on. It's what powers our vehicles. It's what helps us cool and heat our homes. Take a look at California, where electricity costs have gone up 50% in the last 2 years. 50%, and it's going to get worse. And the reason it's going to get worse is because the climate activists, the climate extremists, radicals in California, have been aggressively shutting down oil, gas, coal, and nuclear power. And yet what we have the Secretary of Energy, who's probably leading the cheers at the White House today, saying last week that California is taking the lead. If they're taking the lead, they're taking the lead to energy that's more expensive and less reliable. The religion today of the Democrat Party is a religion of climate. They worship the sun god, the wind god, and the god of wishful thinking. The American people want energy that is affordable, available, and reliable. The activists in the Democrat Party don't want any of that. They want renewable energy only, regardless of the cost and regardless of the consequences to the American families. And they continue to wrap up in red tape any efforts to produce red, white, and blue American energy. Now we have Joe Manchin, who's trying to hide behind a fig leaf of an agreement he made with Chuck Schumer about trying to cut a little bit of that red tape. Well, I would say to my friend Joe Manchin, who is the chairman of the Energy Committee, that what they're celebrating today at the White House is the damage you have already done by passing this reckless bill. You voted for it. And if you're now looking for Republicans to support and give you more cover than you have right now, you're not going to find it with us.
So gasoline costs traditionally, historically go up and they go down. Food costs go up and almost never go down. 8.3% increase year over year this month, and that's with a decrease in gasoline prices. Imagine how much everything else had to go up above 8.3% to get that to happen. Food went up 13.5%. Since Biden became president, it's 17% higher than it was. Costs more to feed your family. The increase in the cost of feeding your family in the last month was higher than any time since 1979. Cost of providing electricity to your house more than any time in the last 40 years. This is a serious problem. They celebrate today at the White House making it more serious by putting still more money into the economy than would have been there without the passage of this last bill. They're doing exactly the worst thing you could possibly do if you're trying to fight inflation, while at the Federal Reserve, they're raising the interest rates to make it harder to buy your house, your car, or anything else. That may be the only option we have based on what Democrats have already done. But the last bill they passed is in addition to the bill that everybody knows is the root of this inflation. When the economy was recovering, you don't pass a $2 trillion American recovery plan and dump that on top of a recovering economy.
So this past Sunday on September 11th, I did what I do every single year on September 11th. I turned on the TV and watched the same events unfold that we saw 21 years ago. And my reaction is still the same. It's one of mourning, one of loss. And I recognized at that point that we live in a very, very dangerous world. I recognize that still today. Unfortunately, Chuck Schumer does not recognize that. We have a National Defense Authorization Act that has yet to be taken up on the Senate floor. We spend these weeks going through and voting on judges, and yet we can't bring the NDAA up for a vote. We see the Democrats down the hill celebrating enormous government spending on tree equity and subsidies for electric vehicles that only the wealthiest of Americans can purchase. This is what they're celebrating today, instead of spending time today on the floor of the Senate making sure that our United States of America is protected against Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, violent extremist organizations. This should have been done a long time ago. Our nation was founded for the protection of its people. And yet the Democrats and Joe Biden continue to ignore the very reason we have a federal government. They need to come back together and move on the NDAA.
With Biden inflation, Florida families are paying about $9,000 more per year just to stay even. $9,000. That means you have to work more hours, take another job, cut your costs somehow just to make ends meet. If you talk to families in Florida, they're going to food banks that they never went to before. You talk to retirees, they're taking second or third jobs, they're going back to work, delaying their retirement. If you talk to businesses, they're cutting their hours, they're cutting their costs. When you talk to Floridians, what they're telling you is, you know, there's not as many full-time jobs out there. So you start looking at the numbers. You know, we read all these numbers that say how the Biden administration said they're adding all these jobs. In the month of August, in the last month, I guess, that must be the July numbers, the country didn't add full-time jobs, they cut. 242,000 full-time jobs were eliminated. What we added was part-time jobs. People doing 2 and 3 jobs. On top of that, if you go look at the numbers for the last few months, the number of self-employed is dropping. It's all because of Biden's economy, Biden's inflation. It's killing the job market out there. And it's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse until we stop this reckless spending that's happening up here.
Chad. Chad.
Lindsey Graham has this 15-week abortion ban. If you take the Senate, will you put this on the floor of the Senate for a vote, or will you commit to leaving this issue entirely to the states?
Well, with regard to his bill, you'll have to ask him about it. In terms of scheduling, I think most of the members of my conference prefer that this be dealt with at the state level.
With regards to the abortion issue, do you feel like Republicans are doing enough? It seems like Democrats are kind of controlling the issue right now with saying that your grandmother had more rights than you. Do you feel like Republicans need to do a better job of educating America?
Well, I think every Republican senator running this year in these contested races has an answer as to how they feel about the issue. And it may be different in different states. So I leave it up to our candidates, who are quite capable of handling this issue, to determine for them what their response is.
What about Republican leadership itself?
On the threatened rail strike, do you expect Democrat and White House support for Burr Wicker to head this off?
Well, my understanding of this rather complicated procedure is that the president's board has made a recommendation as to how this should be settled. And unless he's changed his position, the president apparently supports the position of the presidential board. That seems to me to be the perfect place to get the strike settled. The president's always bragging about how much influence he has with unions and how much influence they have with him. This would be a good time to demonstrate that by insisting that the recommendation of his own board be implemented.
Leader McConnell. There are talks ongoing about same-sex marriage and whether there should be a vote to codify same-sex marriage in the coming weeks. Do you support that issue coming up for a vote? Do you support where the compromise is now?
Well, as was just pointed out in an earlier question, I don't control the agenda. If the majority leader decides to bring it up, we'll see where the votes are. Thank you.